let's move to the next section now, which is social and economic conditions, population growth and migration in the early period, in this period between 1777 to 1860. In 1790, families had many children. The lifespan was short. The median age was 16, and 2% of the population was over 65. Now, I just want you to imagine this, like only 2% of the population was over 65. You know, in the United States today, we are reaching a point where the elderly are becoming larger in the population. But at that time in the United States, the US population was really very, very young. Most likely the only place you get, and even in Africa, it's not going to be, I know Africa has the largest concentration of young population, but even in Africa, the average age, the median age is still going to be more than 16. So the US at that time was full of very young people. Okay. Now, there's something called demographic transition theory. And I don't have the opportunity here to draw something like a diagram to illustrate it. But let me just give this an idea for you, because it will help you as you go through this course and understand what is happening in the United States. Demographic transition theory says that there are 3 stages that the population of every country goes through. Now, this is a general idea. Some people may have some critique of that. I don't have the time to get into that. But I think it's good for you to get this general idea. Stage 1 of this demographic transition is where fertility is high and mortality is also high. In other words, people are giving birth to many children, but many people are also dying because people are poor, there's very little medical attention or something like that. So people can easily die because of all these reasons. So even though the fertility rate, the number of children per woman is very high, yet the number of people that die is also very high. So the population is more or less balanced, okay? But in stage 2, something happens. The fertility rate remains very high, but the mortality rate goes down. So what does that mean? What that simply means is that in many parts of the world, but let me use Africa as an example, when new ideas of medicine or Western medicine came in, there was a lot of improvement in people's lives. So the longevity of people's lives improved. You find out that life expectancy kind of got extended and things like that. So the mortality rate, because of that, in those countries, because of the introduction of Western medicine and things like that, the mortality rate went down. But the fertility rate still remained high because people have children for so many reasons, cultural reasons, and it's not easy for you to change that. But it's easy for you to convince somebody that, oh, you're going to die, you're sick or whatever, why don't you use this medicine or something? They will quickly take it, accept that new idea. But when it comes to telling people you should have fewer children, it's something, you're really getting into some private lives of people there. Very, very private, because it's something, a relationship between husband and wife. So that's why fertility rate will remain high in stage 2, but mortality rate will go down. So, but then with increased education in that society, then you move to stage 3. In stage 3, then the fertility rate comes down. And you're going to see this in the United States. Fertility rate comes down because in stage 3, women become more educated, women have more rights, okay? So even in marriage, they are not just kind of just there at the receiving end, but they also play an active role. They are considered to be equal with the husband. And they are more educated. There's more contraceptive medicine to regulate their fertility and all those kind of things. So as a result of that, fertility rate is going to come down. And when fertility rate comes down in stage 3, then there's a balance of population. Fertility rate is low and mortality rate is really low, okay? So bear this in mind, because this is going to be helpful for you to understand. Now, there are certain arguments people make about this here and there, but I think as a general description of how fertility moves, there are certain historical events that can change certain things a little bit. For instance, after the Second World War, when the soldiers came back, they were concerned about trying to make up for the time they were away. So there was a baby boom, okay? It was a baby boom period. But after some time, again, the population of the United States started stabilizing. And right now, as I'm talking to you, our fertility rate has become probably the lowest in recent, maybe decades. The fertility rate is really, really very, very low. And there are good reasons for that, but I don't want to get into that because we don't have time. Okay, this gives you an idea of this whole question of population. By 1860, the population was aging, and age no longer revered over wealth and prosperity. This is something really also very important to show you the shift in values in the United States. So around 1790, if you are an elderly person, you will receive quite a lot of respect. When I was growing up in Nigeria, for instance, that was the kind of thing. Elderly people are respected. If you are an elderly person, you don't need to demand respect. People are going to really respect you, okay? And I remember when I came to the United States, I couldn't call, for instance, the chair of my department or my senior colleagues by their first name. I felt like I was disrespecting them. Of course, they were older than me, but they were also more experienced or something like that. So there's this kind of idea that you have to respect somebody who is elderly, whether you know that person or not. But by 1860, now it is not age that deserves a lot of respect, but it is wealth and property. Wealth and property. So it means you could be young, okay? But if you have wealth and property like Elon Musk, okay, he's young. There are a lot of elderly people in the United States, but they don't receive attention as he does. When Elon Musk says something, everybody listens to him. It's in the media every time, okay? But maybe there are even pastors who say some things, but nobody listens to them because the value of the cultural values of the society have shifted significantly, okay? So this was something that you have to observe as taking place in this period in the United States. And then by 1860, there were 4.5 million African Americans, but 4 million were slaves. So just understand that there were about 500,000 black people that were free, okay, out of the 4.5 million. A point I want to draw your attention to, which is something that many people don't want to engage in the United States, is that among these free African Americans, there were some of them who owned slaves, and those slaves were black. Now, it doesn't fit the dominant narrative, meta-narrative about the history of this country to say that there are black people who own slaves. But what I want to draw your attention to here, and this is a point I brought up earlier in an earlier lecture, that simply because I am black, I am an African, doesn't automatically mean that I am inherently more superior, morally more superior than other people, whether in Asia, in Europe, or Latin America, or something like that. Morality is not a question of your skin color. It's something you have to develop, you have to cultivate. So in this case, slavery was a business. And so free black people too, some free black people who had the opportunity to enslave at that time, some of them decided to enslave other blacks because it was just like a business. So if the issue was just a simple question of skin color, you would expect that they would say, no, I'm not going to do that. But because it's converted into a kind of business, it became something totally different. So just bear this in mind. I remember very, very much when I was reading something about the South, for instance, especially the state of Louisiana. I was very amazed to find out that this was the case in some places. Okay, in 1774, there was a decision that there will be no more slave trade. Now, let me make some comment about that. In America, even though we have had slave trade in the early period of the history of this country, but there were people who wrestled with this. And when you check very, very carefully, you're going to find out that even Thomas Jefferson, who wrote the Declaration of Independence, and he owned slaves himself, okay? But in some of his writings, you could see that he was kind of morally kind of like rejecting, he morally criticized slavery, even though he had it. And here I want you to understand the distinction between sometimes human beings might know something as morally wrong, but because of either economic necessity or economic expediency, they will still do that thing that they consider to be morally wrong. So from the very early period of the history of the United States, while there was slavery, but there were also some people who felt it was really something that was wrong. Okay, so in 1774, there was a desire to end slavery, but slave trade, but it didn't work until 1808. So just understand that, when it was prohibited. Okay, in 1800, 6% of the population was urban. But by 1860, 20% was urban. Now, why should you care about this? If you study the history of Western civilization, this is a major turning point in the history of who human beings are. When you move from rural area to urban, urban center, okay? There's an article that I read, I remember since when I was an undergraduate, and I continue to remain very fascinated by it. It's by Louis the Worth. I think he was at the University of Chicago, and he wrote an article titled Urbanism as a Way of Life. Urbanism as a Way of Life. So for instance, how do people cope with life in the urban center? Okay, how do people cope with life? It's different from rural community. Interestingly, I grew up in a rural community, and moving to the United States at that time was really something phenomenal to me, because if you live in a rural community, it's like everybody knows everybody, more or less. If you wear a new dress to church or wear new shoes, probably your place of worship, if you're not a Christian, people will know that, today this person is wearing this or something like that, okay? So people know each other. I remember in my village, the moment you go around and people see you, if you're a new face, they will say, who is this person or something like that. And then when you see people, you have to greet them, you have to acknowledge them. But take, for instance, in the city, one of the ways we cope with life in the city is what we call civil inattention. Civil inattention is like in your university, maybe when you are walking on the corridor and you see some people coming, you see somebody coming, even though you know them or something like that, when they come close, you just take your face and look another direction. And then when they pass, then you continue looking forward. This is what we call civil inattention. You don't want to pay attention to a lot of people, because if you're going to talk to everybody in the building, then you're not going to be able to go to your office and do your own work, okay? So there are so many ways we cope with life in the city. Ferdinand Tönnies, a German sociologist, has written quite a lot about that. He made a comparison between what he called Gemeinschaft and Gesellschaft. So the Gemeinschaft is the kind of like tradition, or like the kind of traditional village life, if you like, and then Gesellschaft, the city life. So this is something that is really very, very important. One aspect of living in the city is that it makes us cosmopolitan. Cosmopolitan here simply means if I am in a place, like let's say I go to Barnes and Nobles, I can meet anybody there, but it's not going to shock me because I'm used to that. Okay, somebody might dress this way, somebody might dress the other way, people might be kissing each other or whatever. So be it. Okay, you just are used to the fact that this is a public place. You're going to meet people with different opinions, from different cultural backgrounds or something like that. So this is something that we get in the city. You get used to life in the city. You become hopefully cosmopolitan. You're used to the fact that the people in the city are not just going to be like you. And this can help in creating social movements. What I mean by creating social movement, it means we can all come together and work together to bring about change. I don't have to be part of a group that are only immigrants or immigrants from Africa or only black people or something like that. Okay, I can be part of a group with people from different parts of the world. I was just listening to a lecture in my car about the 99%. Okay, very, very interesting, because they talk about this cosmopolitan attitude where during that time, people who gathered in the park and they were protesting or whatever, they come from different backgrounds. So that's having a cosmopolitan attitude, okay? So the shift from rural to urban population means quite a lot in terms of so many other things. Okay, and then by 1840, the population of the United States was 31 million, let's say roughly 32 million or 31 million. I just checked, actually when I was looking at this, I just checked the US population and I found out that it's 329 point something million. So we're almost kind of like 330 million. And when you really look at it, it's almost like the population has grown by how many percent or whatever compared to what it was at this period, because we are now 329.5 something, okay? So, and then remember that the immigrants at that time were mainly from Germany and Ireland. It's very, very important to know this. I don't have the time to get into this, but there's a whole literature, the different theories of migration, where people migrate. And then what are the kind of challenges that people experience? We talked a little bit about that in the past, but what are some of the challenges that people experience when they migrate? For instance, if somebody migrated from, say, Britain to the United States, they would still make some adjustment, but the adjustments are not going to be as high as somebody who moved from a country that is mainly pre-industrial. And what I mean by pre-industrial, even though when you go to their cities, like in many African countries, the cities may look like Western cities, but if you go to the interior of the country, you will find out that because industrialization has not taken place, the people are more or less living in pre-industrial culture. So when somebody moves to an advanced industrial society like the United States, there's a lot of adjustment in that case. The person will need to adjust more compared to somebody who moved from Britain to the United States. When I came to start my graduate studies at the University of Minnesota, for instance, one of the first things I had to struggle with was how to wash my clothes, the laundry machine. I didn't know how to use the laundry machine. I was afraid that if I operated the laundry machine, it's going to explode, and then something is going to happen. So somebody had to teach me. Another international student from Taiwan had to teach me how to use it. And then now, of course, it has become very ordinary. But remember that a child in the United States who is just 7 years can operate the laundry machine without any problem. So what am I trying to say here? A point you should bear in mind with regard to migration is that when the people coming here look more or less like already the people here, it's relatively much easier for them to adapt. I'm not saying that there are no challenges. They still encounter some challenges, but it's much easier. But when you move to the United States from a culture that is much more less developed and then culturally much more different, and when I say much more different, for instance, the idea of liberal rights or democratic rights, if you come from a culture where liberal or democratic rights are not really institutionalized, it's going to be a huge adjustment for you to adapt to what it is in this country. Okay. Most immigrants remain in the northern part of the country. So when the immigrants came to the United States, as I said, most of them were from Ireland and Germany at this time. Most of them stay in the East Coast. You wouldn't be surprised because that's very close to the Atlantic. The East Coast is close to the Atlantic Ocean. And the immigrants were perceived as a threat to resident Americans. This is something that I want you to bear in mind very, very much when I say they are a threat. They are a threat because, and I think somewhere you're going to see, when I talk about xenophobia, there's something about xenophobia where I gave an example of a documentary film called Zero Tolerance. It was produced by the Public Broadcasting Service in the United States. But let's talk a little bit about the threat to resident Americans, okay? There are so many ways. This is not a problem of just Americans. Let me say this. Again, I want to make this discussion very global because sometimes when we talk about it, we make it look like it's a problem between white Americans and other people. No, that's not necessarily the case. Sometimes, for instance, when I go to Guatemala, when I used to go there and teach, when I'm in Antigua, when I'm working, when I look to the left, somebody is looking at me. When I look to the left, to the right, somebody is looking at me. When I look back, somebody is paying attention to me. When I look forward. Why? Because I look different. Okay, there are black people in Guatemala, but they don't see them very common like that, okay? And more especially when they see you walking very confidently as if you know what you're doing. They are also surprised about that, maybe because of what they have heard about black people or something like that, okay? So, and just understand, I remember when I was growing up also in Nigeria, there's a term they use called Ghana must go. Ghana must go was a time when the Nigerian leadership decided to force all Ghanaians that were living in Nigeria to go back to their country or something like that. Now, if this was to happen in the United States, definitely it would be considered essentially in terms of race. You understand what I mean? But you see, so just understand that this kind of things, when people see immigrants, when immigrants come, when they look different, sometimes the difference, as you can see there, is in the area of religion. Because at one point, most of the people migrating to the United States are Catholic and Jewish, okay? And I remember reading some of the literature, how the Catholic had to push back at some of the publications in the public schools where children were taught how to read and write, but in the process of teaching them how to read and write, some of the books that were written were ridiculing the Catholic Church or people who were Catholic. So the Catholic Church had to organize to protest that those kind of materials cannot be used in the education of people. So in other words, because America is a predominantly Protestant country, the Catholic and the Jewish people face quite a lot of pushback because they look different and their religious traditions look different. And then immigrants are willing to work at lower than generally accepted wages. This is an issue that we still have here, but it's pure economics. Okay, what do I mean by pure economics? The typical American, when he or she is offered a job, they have a different benchmark of analysis, okay, because they're American. They grew up here and all those kind of things. And when they do the math, they feel like, no, I'm not going to accept this job, this is low or something like that. Maybe they have an expectation of a higher standard of living or something like that. But if somebody is from another continent where the standard of living is lower, okay, that person is not stupid, okay? It's not like the person is stupid. The person knows exactly what he or she is doing. But when they come to the United States and they are looking for a job, their benchmark may be different from that of the native-born American, in the sense that they would compare what they are going to be earning here with what they would have been earning if they were in their country of birth, where the wages would have been lower, okay? And because of that, they would take the job at a lower wage. But when a lot of them come and take jobs at lower wages, then they are making it impossible for native-born Americans to push the employers to increase the wages so that they can meet the demands or expectations of native-born American labor. Okay? So that's how it can become a threat. But when you think about it purely in terms of capitalism, the way capitalism operates, there's nothing wrong with that. It's kind of like trading in the market, demand and supply, okay, and all those kind of things. So this is something I would like to also draw your attention to, the fact that this whole idea that you can have capitalism just free, there's no any intervention or anything like that, sometimes sounds like just so simplistic when you look at the reality. And what I mean by so simplistic is, you know very well that if there's going to be free movement of labor across the border in the United States, there are people who will come across the border who will do certain jobs that Americans would do, but probably at about 75% the cost of what an American is paid. And that means good profit for the owner of the business, okay? And if the owner of the business is able to play around and not pay all the taxes they're supposed to pay, it means there's even no benefit to the greater community. It just goes to the individual. Okay, think about that.